They say the mind forgets to protect itself. But what if someone remembered everything? Every slight, every kindness, every moment you wished had never happened. What if that person was you? London, 1834. Dr. Elias Marchwood stood before the Royal Society of Medicine and made a claim that would either revolutionize science or destroy his career. He had discovered a way to erase specific memories from the human mind, not through crude lobotomy or hypnotic suggestion, but through a precise chemical process that could excise a single moment from a person's history as cleanly as a surgeon removes a tumor. The aristocracy, predictably, went mad for it. Within 6 months, Marchwood's Harley Street practice became the most exclusive in London. Lords paid fortunes to forget gambling debts. Ladies erased indiscretions. Politicians eliminated inconvenient truths. For the right price, Dr. Marchwood could make your past whatever you wished it to be. There was only one rule. He never treated the same patient twice. One memory, one payment, one chance. Because Marchwood knew what his clients didn't, that a mind with too many holes eventually forgets how to hold anything at all. But every rule has an exception, and his exception walked into his office on a Tuesday in November, asking him to do the impossible. "I need you to make me forget my husband," she said. Elias looked up from his notes. The woman standing in his consultation room was perhaps 30, dressed in widow's black despite the absence of mourning jewelry. Her hands were steady. Her voice was calm. But her eyes held the kind of exhaustion that came from carrying something too heavy for too long. "You've been here before," Elias said. "It wasn't a question. 3 years ago. You removed a memory from me then." Elias felt something cold settle in his chest. "I don't treat repeat patients, Mrs. Thorne. Catherine Thorne." She sat without being invited, a small act of defiance that suggested she knew he wouldn't refuse her. "And I'm aware of your policy. But 3 years ago, you erased my memory of my wedding day. And now I need you to erase my memory of my husband's death." The room seemed to contract. Elias set down his pen with careful precision. "Why would you ask me to erase your wedding?" "Because it was the worst day of my life," Catherine said simply. "My marriage to Lord Edmund Thorne was arranged by my father to settle debts. Edmund was 43. I was 19. The wedding itself was. I don't need to describe it. You understand transactions disguised as sacraments." Elias did understand. He had built his practice on the shame of the upper classes. "And now he's dead," Catherine continued, "and I find myself in a peculiar position. I don't remember marrying him, you see. I remember being 19 and engaged, and then I remember waking up married, as if someone had simply edited my life. For 3 years, I've lived with a husband I have no emotional attachment to because I miss the moment that would have created it." "That was your choice," Elias pointed out. "It was," Catherine agreed, "and it was the correct choice. The wedding would have traumatized me. This way, I simply endured a marriage I didn't feel bound to. But now Edmund is dead, killed in a riding accident last month, and I find that I'm experiencing something unexpected. Which is grief." She said it like it was a foreign word. "Not for him, exactly, but for the version of my life where I might have loved him, where I might have mourned him honestly. Instead, I feel nothing. And the absence of feeling is somehow worse than feeling too much." Elias studied her face. In his 5 years of practice, he had seen every variation of human regret. But this was different. This was a woman mourning the loss of her own capacity to mourn. "You want me to erase his death," Elias said slowly, "so you can, what? Pretend he's still alive." "No." Catherine leaned forward. "I want you to erase his death so I can grieve properly, so I can experience the loss without the confusion, so I can mourn the man I never knew how to love because I erased the beginning of our story. That's not how memory works, Mrs. Thorne. If I remove your memory of his death, you won't suddenly develop feelings for him. You'll simply forget he died. You'll wake up every morning expecting him to be alive, and every time someone mentions his passing, you'll experience his death for the first time. Over and over. Forever. Yes, Catherine said. I know. The silence between them was profound. Why would you want that? Elias asked, genuinely disturbed. Because forgetting the pain didn't make me stronger, Dr. Marchwood. It made me hollow. I erased my wedding to protect myself, and in doing so, I erased my ability to feel anything for the man I spent 3 years living beside. He deserved better. I deserved better. Her voice cracked, just slightly. I want to feel something real, even if it hurts. Especially if it hurts. Because the alternative is this terrible, pristine numbness where nothing touches me because I've cut out all the parts that might. Elias felt an uncomfortable recognition stirring in his chest. He had built his entire career on the premise that pain was optional, that suffering was a choice, that the past could be edited into something bearable. But Catherine Thorne was sitting in his office, asking him to restore her pain because its absence had destroyed something fundamental in her. I can't help you, Elias said quietly. Can't or won't. Both. The procedure doesn't work the way you're hoping. And even if it did, I made a rule for a reason. One memory, one treatment. Otherwise what? Catherine's eyes were sharp now. Otherwise, people like me might realize that erasing our pain doesn't heal us. It just makes us strangers to our own lives. Otherwise, your clients might understand that they are not paying you to cure them. They're paying you to lobotomize their souls one memory at a time. Elias stood. I think this consultation is over. I'll pay you £10,000. He froze. £10,000 was more than he made in a year, even with his exclusive clientele. The money isn't the issue. Then what is? Catherine stewed as well, and suddenly they were facing each other across the desk like duelists. You're afraid. You built this practice on the idea that forgetting is healing, and I'm proof that it's not. I'm the patient who came back, Dr. Marchwood. I'm the ghost of everyone you've cured, walking around wondering why they feel like they're missing pieces of themselves. Get out, Elias said, but there was no force behind it. Catherine reached into her bag and placed a bank draft on his desk. £10,000, made out to Dr. Elias Marchwood. I'll come back Friday, she said. If you cash that, I'll know you've decided to help me. If you don't, I'll understand that some doctors prefer patients who never realize they're still sick. Then she was gone, leaving only the check and the faint scent of lavender. Elias stayed at the bank draft for a long time. Then he opened his locked drawer and pulled out a leather-bound journal he hadn't touched in 3 years. Inside were records of every patient he had treated. Names, dates, memories erased. And beneath each entry, in his own handwriting, notes he had never shared with anyone. He found Catherine Thorne's entry from 1831. Patient, Catherine Thorne, née Ashford, memory removed. Wedding day, June 14th, 1831 payment. £500 notes. Patient presented with acute distress. Wedding to Lord Edmund Thorne. Arranged marriage, significant age gap. Patient described the ceremony as a funeral for who I could have been. Removal successful. Patient reported immediate relief. Personal note. She looked at me with such hope when she woke up. As if I'd saved her life. I wonder if she'll thank me in 5 years. Or if she'll hate me for teaching her that pain is something to be excised rather than endured. Elias closed the journal. His hand was shaking. That night, he didn't sleep. Instead, he sat in his study with a bottle of brandy and the journal, reading through 3 years of patience. Lords who erased affairs. Ladies who erased childbirths that had gone wrong. Soldiers who erased battles. Children who erased abuse. And beneath every entry, his own handwriting, asking the same question. Did I help them? Or did I just teach them how to run from themselves? By morning, he had made his decision. Catherine returned on Friday, and Elias was waiting. I cashed your check, he said without preamble. But I'm not going to erase your husband's death. Her face fell. Then why? I'm going to restore your wedding. Catherine went very still. What? You were right about something, Elias said, gesturing for her to sit. Erasing your pain didn't heal you. It just created a different kind of wound, the wound of absence. You can't grieve your husband because you never properly married him. You're a widow to a man you have no emotional history with. So you'll give me back the wedding. Catherine's voice was barely a whisper. I'll try. The reversal process is theoretical. I've never attempted it. But if it works, you'll remember your wedding day, all of it. The fee, the shame, the loss of agency, everything you paid me to remove. And then you'll have the foundation to grieve. You'll remember the beginning of your marriage, and that will give context to its ending. You'll be whole again, even if that wholeness includes pain. Catherine closed her eyes. Tears slid down her cheeks, and she didn't wipe them away. When can we start? Now. But Catherine, Elias waited until she looked at him. Once I do this, I can't undo it again. You'll have to live with whatever comes back. And there's no guarantee your mind will process it the way you hope. Memory is not just data. It's interpretation. You might remember your wedding and discover you hate Edmund more, not less. You might remember and find the grief is unbearable. I'm already unbearable, Catherine said. At least this way, I'll be honestly unbearable instead of numbly unbearable. The procedure took 3 hours. Elias had developed the reversal technique in theory but never tested it. The concept of restoring erased memories went against everything his practice stood for. Why would anyone pay to remember what they'd paid to forget? But as he administered the chemical compounds and guided Catherine through the delicate process of neural restoration, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, like he was actually helping someone instead of just making them more comfortable with their own avoidance. When Catherine woke, she was crying. I remember, she whispered. I remember the church. I remember his hand on my arm, how cold it was. I remember my father giving me away like I was cattle. I remember, she choked on a sob. I remember Edmund looking at me during the vows, and he looked sorry, not lustful or possessive, just sorry, like he knew what this was costing me and wished it could be different. Elias handed her a handkerchief. How do you feel? Terrible, Catherine said, and then she laughed through her tears. Absolutely terrible, and more alive than I've felt in 3 years. She stayed in his office for another hour, crying and talking and processing the memory that had been returned to her. And when she finally left, she turned back at the door. Thank you, she said, for making me whole again, even though whole includes broken parts. Elias watched her go and felt something crack open in his chest. That night, he made a decision that would destroy his practice and remake his life. He began contacting his former patients. The letters went out over the course of a month. Carefully worded, clinically precise, but carrying an unmistakable message. I have developed a technique to restore erased memories. If you are experiencing difficulties integrating your amended past, I am offering consultations to discuss reversal. No charge. This is not a solicitation, but an offer of correction. Of the 217 patients he had treated, 43 responded. Somewhat angry. How dare he suggest their healing was incomplete? Somewhat desperate. They had paid him to forget, and forgetting had solved nothing. Some were simply curious. What would it mean to remember again? Elias met with each one individually, and what he discovered horrified him. Lord Pemberton had erased his memory of a duel where he'd killed his best friend. Without the memory, he'd lost all sense of consequence. He'd fought 3 more duels since, killing 2 more men, because he no longer understood that death was permanent. Lady Morrison had erased the birth of her stillborn daughter. Without the memory, she'd had 4 more children, each one leaving her feeling emptier because she didn't understand she was trying to replace a loss she no longer remembered suffering. Mr. Whitmore had erased his memory of being beaten by his father. Without the memory, he'd begun beating his own son, unable to recognize the cycle because he'd cut out the part of himself that understood why violence was wrong. Every patient Elias had cured had developed new pathologies, new gaps, new ways of hurting themselves and others because they no longer had access to the experiences that had taught them to be human. Catherine had been right. He wasn't healing people. He was teaching them to become strangers to themselves. Over the next 6 months, Elias reversed 41 memory erasures. 2 patients chose to keep their amendments, preferring comfortable numbness to painful truth. And with each restoration, Elias felt the weight of what he had done settle more heavily on his shoulders. He had believed he was helping. He had believed that suffering was optional, that the past could be edited, that pain served no purpose. He had been catastrophically wrong. 1 year after Catherine Thorne walked back into his office, Elias Marchwood closed his Harley Street practice. He didn't retire. Instead, he opened a new clinic in a less fashionable part of London, with a different kind of shingle above the door. Drive E. Marchwood, memory integration specialist. We do not erase. We do not forget. We help you carry what you cannot put down. The work was harder. The pay was worse. The patients were messier. People who had been damaged by life and needed help integrating their pain rather than excising it. But Elias slept better than he had in 5 years. Catherine visited sometimes, usually bringing tea and conversation. She had remarried, a kind man, a professor of literature who knew her whole story and loved her anyway. She still grieved Edmund occasionally, sudden stabs of loss that caught her off guard. "Does it get easier?" she asked once, sitting in Elias's shabby new office. "No," Elias said honestly, "but you get stronger. The pain doesn't shrink. You grow around it." Catherine smiled. "That's what I tell Edmund's son now. I've been writing to him. You know, he didn't know his father well. Edmund was distant. But I can tell him stories now. I can tell him his father looked sorry during our wedding, that he tried to be kind even though he'd bought a bride. It's not much, but it's true." "Truth is more than most people offer," Elias said. "It's more than you used to offer," Catherine replied, but her tone was gentle. Elias accepted the rebuke. "I thought I was helping people escape their pain. I didn't understand I was just trapping them in smaller and smaller versions of themselves." "You understand now," Catherine said. "That's what matters." She left as dusk fell, and Elias sat alone in his office, surrounded by case files of people learning to be whole again. On his desk was his old journal, the one with all the patients he'd cured. He opened it to a random page and read his own notes from years ago. Personal note: "Every memory I remove, I feel like I'm amputating a piece of someone's soul. But they're in so much pain. Surely it's kinder to let them forget." Below it, in fresh ink, he had written a new note. Current note: "Kindness is not the same as help. The kindest thing I can do is teach people that they are strong enough to remember. That pain is not the enemy. Forgetting is." Elias closed the journal and looked out the window at London's smoke-stained sky. Somewhere in this city were 217 people he had taught to forget. 41 had learned to remember again. 176 were still walking around with holes in their lives, wondering why they felt incomplete. He couldn't fix them all. Some would never come back. Some would live their entire lives as edited versions of themselves, comfortable but hollow. But the ones who did come back, the ones who chose to remember, to grieve, to feel the full weight of their lives, they were the ones who taught Elias the most important lesson he'd ever learned. You cannot heal what you refuse to remember. You cannot grieve what you pretend never happened. And you cannot love, truly, deeply, honestly love, unless you're willing to risk the pain of loss. Catherine Thorne had walked back into his office asking for an impossible thing, to feel again, even if it hurt. And in teaching her to remember, Elias had learned to forgive himself for all the times he'd helped people forget. The work wasn't finished. It would never be finished. But for the first time in years, Dr. Elias Marchwood felt like the work was honest. And honesty, he had learned, was the only foundation strong enough to build a life on. Even a life that included pain. especially a life that included pain. 3 years later, a young woman walked into Elias's clinic with haunted eyes and a familiar request. "I need you to make me forget." Elias looked at her, really looked at her, and saw himself 5 years ago, so certain that erasure was mercy. "I can't do that," he said gently, "but I can help you learn to carry it, if you'll let me." The woman hesitated. Then, slowly, she sat down, and the real work began. If you could erase one memory from your life, one moment of pain, regret, or loss, would you? And if you did, what part of yourself would you lose along with it? If this question is still rattling around in your head, subscribe, because every story on this channel is designed to make you think long after it ends. Drop your thoughts in the comments.